It begins with a photograph, a single frozen moment, captured more than a century ago, yet still capable of unsettling those who dare to look too closely. The year was 1906, a quiet English village. A traveling photographer was invited to a modest estate to take what should have been a simple family portrait. Two young twins, no more than 6 years old, were dressed in their finest clothes and told to sit still. The resulting image, yellowed with age, shows two children seated side by side, identical in posture, identical in dress, identical in smile. At first glance, it appears to be nothing more than an ordinary keepsake of Edwardian childhood. Sweet, innocent, timeless. But when experts in photographic restoration scan the image more than 100 years later, they notice something disturbing. At high magnification, only one of the children's eyes reflected light in the way human eyes naturally do. The other did not. The right twin's gaze appeared strangely flat, dark, and glassy, almost artificial, as if the face had been painted or, worse, belonged to something that merely imitated a child. Historians argued. Scientists debated. Skeptics dismissed it as a trick of the camera, a flaw in development. Yet others whispered of something far more sinister, something that could not be explained by technology or time. So, what exactly was captured in that photograph? Why does one child appear human, and the other something else entirely? Tonight, we begin unraveling the mystery of the 1906 twins and what lurks behind their unsettling portrait. This is Grave of the Shadows. If you are fascinated by stories where history collides with the unexplained, then subscribe now and join our growing community. And before we go further, tell me in the comments, what do you see when you look into those unnatural eyes? The photograph of the twins was not discovered in a gallery, nor in some celebrated museum. It lay forgotten in a wooden chest, part of a private donation delivered to the Metropolitan Archive of London in early spring 2023. Archivists often receive boxes filled with ordinary items: postcards, family portraits, faded letters of no remarkable significance. Yet the Harrington collection, as it was loosely labeled, held a treasure unlike any other. The image was mounted on a heavy card, the edges browned with age, yet the details startlingly preserved. Two children sit side by side in a small parlor. Their lace collars are starched, their hair carefully parted, their polished boots dangling just above the floor. Behind them, a patterned curtain falls stiffly against the wall, while a vase of flowers tilts slightly on a narrow table, as though placed there at the last moment to add a touch of domestic charm. At first glance, the portrait feels ordinary, even tender. The kind of photograph any parent of the Edwardian era might have displayed proudly on a mantelpiece. But closer inspection unsettles the eye. One child sits rigid, hands clasped tight around a small wooden toy, a carved horse whose legs are crudely painted. His smile appears nervous, stretched too wide. The other twin leans closer to the camera, expression softer. Yet the eyes betray something uncanny. They hold no sparkle, no hint of moisture, no reflection of the photographer's flash. They are dark and glassy, like polished stone. Dr. Eleanor Blackwood, senior curator at the Archive's Photographic Restoration Department, was the first to notice the anomaly. She had handled thousands of images over her career. She knew how shadows behaved on film, how emulsions aged, how imperfections crept into silver halide prints. Yet this was different. The eye of the left twin reflected naturally. The eye of the right twin did not. No glare, no depth, only a flat black surface impossible for a living child. She leaned closer, cotton-gloved hands trembling slightly as she traced the outline. Was it damage? A stain? Or something that had been captured exactly as it appeared in that moment more than a century ago? The more she studied it, the more the photograph resisted ordinary explanation. The twins' faces, so alike at first, began to separate in her mind. One child seemed warm, human, fragile. The other hollow, a mirror without a soul behind it. When she enlarged the image on her scanning monitor, the unease deepened. Tiny cracks in the emulsion revealed themselves, but the glassy eye remained untouched, perfectly smooth, perfectly alien. In the surrounding background, she noticed additional oddities. A shadow near the curtain that did not align with the room's single light source, and what looked like faint marks scratched into the frame's border. Archivists gathered around her desk, whispering theories. Some dismissed it at once. "It's simply degradation," one muttered, unwilling to indulge superstition. Others, younger and more curious, stared at the monitor in silence, as though sensing the weight of something uncanny pressing through the decades. Blackwood could not shake the feeling that this was not a flaw of photography, but a glimpse of something caught between worlds. A secret hidden in plain sight for over 100 years. And as she prepared her initial report, she wrote a single line in the margin that chilled her even as the pen scratched across the paper. "Only one child appears to be alive." Dr. Eleanor Blackwood was not a woman easily unsettled. With more than 20 years spent cataloging and restoring fragile photographs, she had trained herself to see patterns where others saw only stains. She could explain chemical blurs, exposure burns, and even the peculiar distortions created by damp storage. Her colleagues often joked that if a ghost ever truly appeared in an image, Blackwood would be the one to calmly label it emulsion irregularity and file it away. And yet, this photograph of the twins refused to be tamed by her rational mind. Eleanor sat alone in her dimly lit office, the glow of the high-resolution scanner throwing sharp angles across her face. She adjusted her wire-framed glasses and leaned closer. Each time she returned to the image, her conviction grew stronger. This was no ordinary defect. Something about the right twin's eyes unsettled her at a level deeper than logic, almost primal. Her professional instincts told her to proceed cautiously. She retrieved her magnifying glass, a brass-handled relic once belonging to her late mentor, and studied the print again. The reflection was absent. Not faded, not blurred, simply absent, as if light itself refused to acknowledge that eye. Blackwood scribbled notes into her journal, her handwriting small and methodical. Contrast stable. No silver deterioration. Anomaly consistent under magnification. Yet beneath the neat rows of observation, she added a personal line she rarely allowed herself in official reports. "Presence feels unnatural." By the following morning, word of the anomaly had spread quietly through the archives staff. A few assistants drifted into her office under the guise of curiosity. Most shrugged after a glance, muttering about imperfections. But one young cataloger whispered, "It looks alive, but not like us." That comment stayed with Eleanor. She closed the file and pressed the photograph back into its protective sleeve. But she knew this was only the beginning. If the family name could be traced, if estate records could be unearthed, she might learn who these children were and why one of them seemed to stare through the lens with eyes that weren't human. For the first time in years, Eleanor Blackwood felt the pull of obsession. The kind that drags a historian out of safe academic halls and into shadows where questions rarely have comforting answers. Eleanor returned to the photograph late that evening, long after most of the staff had gone home. She dimmed the overhead lights, relying only on the soft hum of her scanning monitor. With a slow breath, she enlarged the section containing the twins' faces. At ordinary scale, their likeness seemed charming, even sweet. But at 10 times magnification, the differences screamed out at her. The left child's eyes reflected the lamplight exactly as one would expect, moisture glinting at the surface, the faint shimmer of depth behind the iris. But the right child, his eyes were wrong, startlingly wrong. They were flat, glossy. They absorbed light instead of returning it. In fact, under extreme enhancement, they seemed to possess a glass-like sheen, like polished obsidian. No pupil, no organic softness, just a cold black stare, endless and lifeless. Eleanor leaned back in her chair, unsettled. She tried explaining it to herself, perhaps damage or a misalignment of the photographic emulsion. But the rest of the child's face was flawless. Hair sharply defined, skin tone natural, even the faint crease of a smile. Only the eyes betrayed something unearthly. She zoomed closer still. Her heart caught as she noticed faint striations around the socket, marks invisible at normal scale. Not scratches in the paper, no, they were too symmetrical, too deliberate, almost like carvings. as if the eyes had been etched into the child's face by some other hand. She rubbed her temples. Surely fatigue was clouding her judgment. Yet when she adjusted contrast levels, another detail surfaced. The right twin's gaze did not align naturally. His line of sight was fractionally off, directed not at the camera but slightly beyond it, to some point behind the photographer. The hair on Eleanor's arms prickled. She had examined thousands of portraits. She knew how subjects looked into a lens. This boy wasn't looking at the photographer. He was looking at something else entirely. She documented the anomaly carefully, photographing her screen, making multiple notes. Still, the unease in her chest refused to quiet. She glanced at the clock. Nearly midnight. The building was silent, save for the faint ticking of an antique wall clock. Something made her look again. Slowly, almost against her will, she scanned the background. Her eye caught on the curtain behind the twins. At first it appeared ordinary, heavy fabric drawn to the side. But in the folds, faint as breath, was the suggestion of a shadow. Too tall, too thin. Its outline didn't match the geometry of the room. Eleanor froze. She enlarged the section. Grain danced across the screen, but the shape persisted. A figure just at the edge of sight, like someone standing close but out of focus. Her pulse quickened. She whispered aloud without meaning to. "You were never alone in this room, were you?" For the first time in her career, Eleanor Blackwood pushed back from her desk, shut down the monitor, and locked the photograph away. She told herself she would analyze it in daylight with colleagues present. But as she gathered her coat, she couldn't shake the feeling that even in the empty archive, she was being watched. The deeper Eleanor dug into the archive's donation records, the clearer the trail became. The photograph of the twins had not come to London by chance. It was part of the long-forgotten estate of the Aldrington family, a surname faintly familiar to anyone who has studied Edwardian society columns. Wealthy, respectable, and yet curiously shadowed by tragedy. In the brittle folders accompanying the donation, Eleanor discovered a marriage certificate dated 1898. Henry Aldrington, a barrister of comfortable fortune, had wed Eleanor Whitcomb, daughter of a shipping magnate whose vessels had carried Manchester cotton across the Atlantic. The union was described in local papers as a promising match between reason and refinement. Their home, a three-story manor on the outskirts of Bath, was the kind of property built to impress. Red brick, gabled windows, lawns swept with precision by gardeners whose names never appeared in the records. The twins, Arthur and Edward, were born in 1900. Contemporary announcements in the Bath Chronicle celebrated their arrival, describing them as identical in every feature, a double blessing to the House of Aldrington. By all accounts, their early years were comfortable. Household records show nannies employed, tutors engaged, and the children provided with expensive toys imported from Germany. Yet beneath this polite veneer, strange rumors lingered. A parish record dated 1905 noted the death of a nursemaid under sudden circumstances. No detail was given. In a later column of the same paper, a neighbor remarked cryptically, "The Aldrington boys are lovely to look upon, though I swear they do not look upon you in the same way." By the time the photograph was taken in 1906, the family's fortunes had already begun to fracture. Henry Aldrington was absent from court proceedings, his once brilliant career marked by erratic disappearances. Letters preserved in the archive revealed a man plagued by anxiety. In one addressed to his brother, he wrote, "The boys do not sleep. They speak in whispers I cannot hear. And Eleanor insists I imagine it, though even she admits their eyes sometimes unsettle her." School records from 1907 contain further curiosities. Teachers noted Arthur, the left twin, was quiet, timid, but eager to please. Edward, the right twin, was altogether different. His handwriting was immaculate yet strangely uniform, as though traced. His answers to arithmetic problems were correct but written before the question was fully posed. One tutor scrawled in the margin, "This child does not learn." He recalls. The family's decline accelerated after the death of Mrs. Aldrington in 1908. Officially, the cause was influenza, yet gossip whispered otherwise. Servants claimed she had grown pale and withdrawn, spending long hours staring at her children's playroom door. One footman, dismissed shortly before her passing, told a local journalist she feared the wrong twin. After her death, Henry abandoned his practice altogether. His letters grew increasingly frantic. Eleanor Blackwood, hunched over the dim archive light, read them with mounting unease. One in particular, dated March 1909, chilled her blood. I have watched Edward at night. He does not sleep. He only waits. When I enter the room, his gaze follows me as though he knows more than I. I swear there are moments when his eyes reflect nothing. Not even the lamp. I have locked the windows. Still, I cannot shake the sense that something stands behind him. By late 1909, the Aldrington name faded from public record. Henry was admitted briefly to a sanatorium outside Bristol, discharged within weeks, fit for no further practice. The twins vanished from the society pages altogether. No school records after 1910, no parish updates, only a stark notice in a police ledger: Aldrington children reported missing. Case unresolved. Eleanor set down the papers, her throat dry. The official records were vague, cautious. But the margins told another story, scribbled notations by parish officials, brief notes from investigators, letters never intended for public view. All pointed toward the same chilling pattern. One child adored, the other feared. The photograph, dated 1906, had captured them together, identical in dress but divided by something far deeper. To the world, they were twins. To their family, they had never been the same. As Eleanor leaned back in her chair, she whispered the names softly into the silent archive: Arthur and Edward Aldrington. One remembered for his sweetness. The other remembered, if at all, for the eyes that seemed not to belong to any human child. And in that moment, she realized the photograph was not merely an artifact of the past. It was a warning. The photograph might have been dismissed as a curiosity, if not for what followed. As Eleanor deepened her investigation into the Aldrington family, more fragments surfaced, each stranger than the last. The archive donation contained not only photographs but also a collection of letters, half-faded, tied together with brittle ribbon. They had belonged to Henry Aldrington, the twins' father. Most were written in a hurried hand, the ink pressed so deep it tore the paper. One letter to his solicitor read: Arthur speaks to me with affection. Edward does not. He repeats phrases I have never uttered. He answers questions I have not yet asked. His eyes fix upon the window at night as if awaiting instruction. If I approach, he whispers to Arthur in a tongue neither of us should know. Another note, never sent, bore only a single sentence: I fear the child is not mine. Eleanor turned these pages slowly, feeling a chill settle into her bones. It was not simply grief or paranoia. Henry described details too specific, too consistent to ignore. A month later, she located a parish logbook from 1907. The vicar had scribbled a private note after visiting the Aldrington home. Twins baptized together, yet they do not share the same light. One boy bowed his head. The other watched me with eyes that reflected no flame of the candle. The log ended abruptly. A later page was torn out. Eleanor requested assistance from the archive's imaging team to scan the other photographs from the collection. Most were ordinary portraits of country estates, servants posing stiffly, blurred group shots of hunting parties. But one image made her heart stall. It was a schoolroom photograph from 1908, taken at the boys' private tutor's home. The class of 12 children sat in neat rows. Arthur could be spotted easily, smiling faintly, his boots scuffed, his posture shy. Edward, however, stood out in an unsettling way. His body appeared perfectly still, unnaturally still. While the other children blurred slightly from the long exposure, Edward's form was unnervingly crisp, as though he had remained motionless for far longer than a boy should. Worse still, when magnified, his eyes showed no catchlight at all. In a room lit by 2 gas lamps, every other child's eyes reflected a point of brightness. Edward's remained pools of black. Rumors collected in the Bath Gazette hinted at further unease. Villagers whispered of the Aldrington twins playing in the garden long past midnight, though when the nursemaid was asked, She swore she had locked their nursery door. A maid reported seeing 2 shadows where only one should fall. The most disturbing testimony came from the governess employed briefly after Eleanor Aldrington's death. In a letter to her sister, she wrote, "The younger one, Arthur, clings to me as though I might protect him. The elder, Edward, smiles politely, but there is no warmth in it. He places his toy horse upon the sill each night as though waiting for something outside. I have caught him speaking to no one, yet Arthur insists. He is not alone. When I asked who was with him, Arthur whispered a word I did not recognize. Sounded like the Watcher. I will not remain in this house much longer." Within weeks, the governess had resigned. Eleanor's unease sharpened when she uncovered a second photograph of the twins, taken not in their home but in the gardens of the Penrose estate, miles away. The date scrawled on the back read, June 1907. The image at first seemed innocuous. Children playing, governesses standing guard. But at the far edge, almost cropped out, stood Edward, apart from the rest, clutching his toy horse. His brother was not beside him. Instead, a tall, indistinct figure loomed just behind, blurred but undeniably present. When enhanced, the figure's proportions were grotesque. Too elongated, its head unnaturally high, shoulders sloped forward as though peering down. The figure's hand seemed to rest lightly on Edward's shoulder, though the fingers were stretched far longer than human anatomy allowed. Eleanor had to push her chair back, pulse racing. She saved the scan and stared at the digital copy, fighting the urge to delete it altogether. More anomalies surfaced as she continued combing the estate papers. Arthur's handwriting from 1909 showed an ordinary child's scrawl, while Edward's exercise books were filled with symbols no tutor could translate. They resembled railway diagrams, intersecting lines and circles that hinted at maps, or perhaps schedules. A historian in the archive noted they bore faint resemblance to experimental notations made by Lord William Penrose, the eccentric engineer whose private railway had been constructed in Cornwall at the time. But why would a child scrawl such patterns in his copybook? By now, Eleanor's colleagues were divided. Some dismissed her findings as coincidence strung together by imagination. But others, drawn in by the accumulating evidence, whispered in the hallways that the Aldrington photograph was more than a curiosity. It was a key. Each fragment, the letters, the parish notes, the photographs, the child's drawings, pulled the narrative tighter. A family undone not by influenza or misfortune, but by something inhabiting one of its children. A twin born human and a twin born as something else. Eleanor could not ignore the growing conclusion. The Aldrington photograph was no innocent family keepsake. It was the first surviving evidence of a presence that had stepped briefly into Edwardian England, choosing a child's body as its disguise. And if the legends were true, such presences did not simply disappear. When Eleanor presented her findings to colleagues, the room divided instantly. The archive's small conference chamber echoed with voices, some sharp with skepticism, others hushed with unease. Professor Malcolm Hartley, a specialist in early photography, spoke first. Adjusting his spectacles, he dismissed the anomalies with a wave of his hand. "Glass plate distortion," he said firmly. "The right child's eyes reflect oddly because of emulsion density. Early cameras often produced such artifacts. Nothing supernatural here, just chemistry and time." Across the table, Dr. Amelia Sutton of the Victoria and Albert Museum shook her head. Her reputation for ruthlessly precise analysis gave weight to her words. "No, Professor. I've examined hundreds of similar photographs. The reflections are not consistent with distortion. If it were chemical, the blemish would appear across the plate, not confined to a single child's eyes. What we see here is intentional, either manipulated or captured exactly as it appeared." The word intentional hung in the air. A younger researcher, Marcus Allen, hesitated before speaking. "The curtain shadow, did anyone notice its angle? It doesn't match the gas lamp's placement. That figure," he trailed off, unwilling to finish. "Pareidolia," Hartley snapped. "Humans see shapes in randomness. Clouds, curtains, shadows. You're all feeding each other's imagination." Yet not all dismissed the unease. Dr. Jonathan Wells, a visiting historian of Edwardian folklore, flipped through the transcripts of Henry Aldrington's letters. These accounts, he said slowly, mirror descriptions from several rural legends: Watcher at the Window, The Thin Man of Bath, and other tales. A presence said to mark a household, often appearing near children. Most dismissed them as cautionary stories. But here we have correspondence suggesting the family themselves feared such a figure. The skeptic scoffed, but Eleanor pressed on, revealing the second photograph. Edward at the Penrose estate garden, the blurred figure looming behind him. Gasps rippled across the table. "This is not chemical error," Sutton whispered. "This is presence." Still, Professor Hartley refused to yield. If not chemical, then fraud. Double exposure, deliberate staging. Wealthy families sometimes staged grotesque photographs as amusements. Perhaps Henry indulged a cruel experiment at his children's expense. Yet the family was destroyed by it, Eleanor countered. Does that sound like amusement? The debate grew sharper. Skeptics framed the anomalies as errors, deliberate hoaxes, or imaginative projections. Believers pointed to the mounting evidence: letters, parish logs, drawings, second photographs. Finally, one voice cut through the clamor. Dr. Robert Haynes, a psychiatrist specializing in historical cases of hysteria, leaned forward. Consider another possibility. Edward was human, yes, but disturbed. The father's obsession, the mother's decline, the rumors. All could be symptoms of untreated mental illness, projected onto a child. The non-human eyes may reflect not the child's reality, but the family's fractured perception. It was a reasonable theory, one that offered closure without mystery. Yet Eleanor felt it fall short. She returned to the enlarged scan on the projector screen, pointing to Edward's glassy gaze. "Tell me," she asked softly, "does that look like perception? Or does it look like something that should not be there at all?" The room fell silent. Even the skeptics had no ready answer. For a long moment, the only sound was the projector's faint hum, illuminating the face of a boy whose eyes still refused to blink after more than a century. The debate might have ended in uneasy stalemate had Eleanor not pushed the investigation further. She could not shake the feeling that the photograph still concealed something more, something beyond the lifeless eyes and the shadow in the curtain. Late one night, she returned to the scanning lab, alone except for the faint hum of the machines. She adjusted the resolution beyond standard limits, magnifying the image until each grain of the emulsion appeared like a universe of silver dust. And then she saw it. On the frame's lower border, barely visible as if etched by a pin, were markings. Not scratches from wear, but deliberate carvings. She enhanced the section until faint shapes emerged. Numbers and letters. 1906 for the Watcher. Her breath caught. She zoomed closer still, pushing the equipment beyond recommended thresholds. This time she examined the toy in Arthur's hands. The small wooden horse she had assumed was ordinary. But at high resolution, something else came into view. Across the underside of the toy's base, too small for the naked eye, were markings that looked impossibly modern. Not carved with a knife, but inscribed with precision. She copied the scan, inverted the contrast, and whispered aloud when the text revealed itself: "Property of E. Aldrington." That was not unusual. But below it, another line: Series 2, Construct 17. Series 2, Construct 17. Words no Edwardian toy maker would ever have used. Words that suggested something manufactured, categorized, catalogued like a specimen. The next day, she shared the finding with Dr. Sutton and Marcus. Both leaned in over the monitor, silent. Marcus finally spoke. "This isn't a toy, is it? It's a marker." More shocks followed. When Eleanor magnified Edward's lifeless eye again, she noticed faint glimmers hidden in the dark surface. They were not reflections but shapes, geometric patterns too regular to be accidental. With filters applied, the black pupil revealed what looked like intersecting lines, almost like a mechanical iris. "Impossible," Sutton muttered. "Unless—" She trailed off, unwilling to complete the thought. The revelation turned every previous clue into something more sinister. Edward had not merely looked different. He had carried within him signs of construction, of design. A child that was perhaps not entirely human. As word spread quietly among the inner circle of researchers, more fragments surfaced. A long-buried police report from 1909 mentioned unexplainable resistance when Edward was lifted during a search. His body described as unnaturally heavy, as though filled with metal. The line had been struck through, dismissed as exaggeration. Even more disturbing was a servant's diary entry recovered from the estate sale archives. I heard it in the nursery, Arthur crying, Edward silent, then a sound like clockwork ticking. I opened the door but saw nothing, only Edward staring with eyes like glass. Arthur begged me, don't leave me alone with him. I will never forget his voice. The evidence converged toward one chilling conclusion. Edward Aldrington was not a normal child. Perhaps he had been born like his brother, but something or someone had changed him. Still, the most devastating discovery came not from letters or diaries, but from a second photograph uncovered in a regional museum. Taken in December 1909, months after the boys were reported missing, it showed a train platform, blurred by exposure. At the edge of the image stood a boy, unmistakably Arthur, clutching the same wooden horse. Beside him, a taller figure loomed, Edward, his face visible in profile. And in that face, the unnatural gleam of a polished, inhuman eye. If the police had declared them missing, how could such a photograph exist? Who had taken it, and why had it remained hidden for over a century? The researchers stared at the copy in silence. Eleanor's voice broke the stillness. This changes everything. Edward wasn't taken. He was guided. And in that instant, the story shifted from a tragic family mystery to something far more extraordinary and terrifying. For Eleanor, the discoveries should have ended in the past. A closed case, a family destroyed, a mystery buried beneath dust and silence. Yet the deeper she delved, the more the present began to stir. It started with the scans. The high-resolution images of the twins were uploaded to the archive's digital database, accessible only to staff. Within days, technicians reported something strange. The files would not stabilize. Each time the image was opened, subtle changes appeared. A shadow slightly longer, a curtain fold altered, and most unsettling of all, Edward's glassy eyes seemed to shift fractionally in angle, as though they were no longer fixed on the camera, but on the viewer. At first, this was dismissed as a glitch, the result of corrupted data. But when the images were printed, the anomalies persisted. Different copies produced variations no digital error could explain. One technician swore that during a late-night quality check, he heard a faint ticking sound from the server room, though no machines were running. He left the building pale and trembling, refusing to return. Rumors spread beyond the archive. A local historical society, upon hearing whispers of the Aldrington twins, dug through parish collections of their own. They produced an unsettling report. 2 visitors to the village of Bath claimed to have seen children playing near the ruins of the Aldrington estate. A boy with a toy horse, another beside him, silent, staring with eyes that reflected no light. More disturbing still was a photograph posted anonymously online in early 2024. It showed a group of tourists at Bath Spa Station, smiling beneath the iron arches. Nothing unusual until one zoomed into the far corner. There, behind the crowd, half shrouded in shadow, stood a tall boy with slicked hair. His face was blurred but unmistakable. The left I caught the station lights. The right I remained flat, dark, glassy. Eleanor stared at the image for hours. The implication was terrifying. Edward Aldrington, or whatever had taken his place, had not vanished with history. He had crossed it, and if he could appear once, who was to say he would not appear again? More than a century has passed since the camera first captured the Aldrington twins. Arthur, with his fragile smile, faded into history as just another missing child. But Edward, if we can even call him that, remains a presence no record can fully erase. Every letter, every photograph, every whispered account points to the same chilling reality. One boy belonged to this world, and the other did not. And whatever force had marked Edward in 1906, never truly left. Consider this. If a photograph could shift under digital scanning, if his eyes could follow across generations, then what else might be possible? Could Edward have slipped through time itself, inhabiting one century after another, always waiting, always watching? Perhaps that is why the rumors never stop. A glimpse in a reflection, a child's laugh in an abandoned garden, a face at the corner of a photograph you swore was empty. So tonight, before you turn off the light, ask yourself, what would you see if you looked too closely at the pictures in your own home? And more importantly, would all of the eyes staring back at you truly be human? This is Grave of the Shadows, where the past refuses to stay buried. If you believe the story of Edward Aldrington is finished, then think again. And if you felt that strange shiver while watching tonight, I want to know. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Was Edward a child consumed by darkness, or something that was never human to begin with? Subscribe now, join our community, and stay with us as we uncover more histories that hide in plain sight. Because next time, the shadow in the photograph might be yours.